Hey everyone, welcome back. Really glad you're here for this one. Quick thing before we dive in, if you end up enjoying today's video, it would mean a lot if you could drop a like and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people. Also, I love hearing from you guys, so make sure to drop a comment below with your thoughts or just let me know where you're watching from. All right, enough talking, let's get into it. The ring wasn't what broke her. It was the sentence that came out right after she took it off. "I buried my dreams for you." Pamela Garcia said it, quietly, the way you say a thing you've rehearsed too many times to still feel it land. She set the ring on the marble counter instead of the table, because the table was where they used to eat dinner together, back when there was a together to eat dinner in. Gong Min stood in the doorway with a duffel bag still in his hand, like he hadn't decided yet whether he was staying long enough to put it down. 3 hours earlier, she had been standing in the same kitchen holding her phone, staring at a listing she'd found completely by accident, a commercial property on Meridian Street, the one with the old brick oven still bolted into the back wall, the one she and Gong Min had walked through 5 years ago when it was still just a fantasy they hadn't priced yet. Under contract, the listing said, sale pending. She'd known the building was his. What she hadn't known was that he was selling it. She'd called the listing agent instead of him, some stubborn part of her needing to hear it from a stranger first, needing one version of the truth that hadn't been filtered through 5 years of him deciding what she could handle. She was from Fairfield, Connecticut originally, a town of quiet streets and quieter ambitions, where girls who wanted more than the town offered usually left it. She had left it for culinary school, then for New York, then for Gong Min, who walked into the restaurant she worked wearing a suit that fit like a decision and ordered nothing, just watched her plate every table for 20 minutes before asking to speak to the chef. She was 26. She had thought foolishly that a man like that noticing her work meant her work would always matter to him. It had for a while. He'd been the one who found the Meridian Street building. He'd stood in the dust with her, in the layer of pigeon debris and broken glass, and said, "This could be yours." And she had believed him with the whole unguarded center of herself, the part she hadn't protected yet because nothing had taught her to. Then the wedding happened. Then the version of her life that came with being Kang Min's wife happened. Galas, introductions, a house with rooms she didn't use, a husband whose absences got longer and whose explanations got shorter until "it's business" became a complete sentence between them, the only sentence really that either of them still reached for. She had put the patisserie dream in a drawer somewhere around year 2, not because he told her to. He'd never told her to do anything. He'd just made it easier every year to let it go than to keep fighting for it, one canceled meeting at a time, one later at a time, until later became a place she'd stopped expecting to arrive. And now he was selling the building without telling her, which meant either he'd forgotten it ever mattered to her, or he'd decided somewhere along the way that it didn't matter enough to ask. She didn't know which one hurt more. He came home a little after 9, the duffel bag already packed, already in his hand, like whatever he'd walked into the house planning to say had a shape that required luggage. He stopped when he saw her standing at the counter. He clocked the ring before she said anything. She watched him do it, watched something in his face go still, in the specific way it went still right before he negotiated with men who wanted him dead. "Pamela, you're selling Meridian Street." It wasn't a question. She'd learned a long time ago that questions gave him room to choose his answer. Statements didn't. He set the bag down slowly, like the weight of it had suddenly become more than physical. "It's not what you think. You don't know what I think. You haven't asked me what I think about anything in longer than I can remember." Her voice stayed even, which surprised her given how much of her wasn't. "I called the listing agent. I heard it from a stranger, Min. 2 months. You've been negotiating for 2 months. There are things happening you don't. The word came out sharper than she meant it to, or exactly as sharp as she meant it to. She genuinely couldn't tell anymore. "Don't tell me there are things I don't understand. I understand plenty. I understand I gave up a career for a marriage where I still don't get told the truth. I understand I've been so busy making myself small enough to fit into your silence that I forgot what my own name sounded like outside of Kang Min's wife. He didn't move toward her. That was new, and it was almost worse than if he had, like some part of him already agreed she was right to want distance. "Where are you going with that?" she asked, nodding at the bag. A long pause, then quiet. "I can't tell you that either. Not tonight." Something in her chest finished breaking cleanly, like a bone that had been hairline fractured for years, finally giving all the way. "I buried my dreams for you," she said again, and this time her voice did shake, just slightly, just enough that she heard it and hated it. "I gave up the one thing that was mine before you existed to me, and I told myself it was worth it because you were worth it. I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't know if I ever really knew you, or if I just knew the parts of you that were convenient to love." She picked up the small bag she'd packed hours ago, sitting by the door since the moment she'd gotten off the phone with the listing agent, some part of her deciding this before the rest of her had caught up. "I'm not doing this to punish you," she said. He didn't reach for her. Later, he would wonder if that half second, his hand staying at his side instead of closing around her wrist, was the moment he lost her for good. The door closed behind her, quiet, no slam, which somehow felt worse than if she'd screamed. Han found him in the study an hour later, standing over the ring on the counter like he hadn't moved. "Sir?" Han's voice was careful, the way it got when he had news that would make things worse before it made them better. Kang Min didn't look up. "Explain." "The Meridian Street buyer isn't who he says he is. The shell company behind the offer traces back to the Cho family, 3 layers deep, but it's them." Han paused. "They didn't want the building, sir. They wanted to know what you'd do to protect it, whether you'd sell something you cared about to keep something else quiet." King Men's jaw tightened. 5 years ago, before the wedding, before any of it, he had made a deal with the Cho family to keep his younger brother's debts from becoming a war, a deal that required him to hand over roots he'd spent a decade building and to make sure no one, especially not the woman he was about to marry, ever learned how close the whole enterprise had come to collapsing under one reckless mistake that wasn't even his own. He buried that mistake the year he'd told Pamela the Meridian Street building could be hers. He had meant it when he said it. He had also known, even then, that the building sat 2 blocks from a Cho family warehouse, and that giving her a dream in that location was its own kind of risk he hadn't fully understood until years later when the Chos started circling. "They've been testing me," slowly Kang Min said, "watching to see if I'd sacrifice something I love to protect the rest. And you were going to sell it and never tell her why. Because the alternative was telling her the truth, that the building isn't safe, that it never was." He finally looked up. "That I let her believe I forgot about her dream because the real reason was worse than forgetting." Han said nothing for a moment. Then, "She left tonight." "I know." "Where's she going?" "I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't have the right to. Not after tonight." Han studied him with the particular patience of a man who'd worked for Kang Min for over a decade and had learned exactly when to push and when to let a decision sit. "You have the bag packed for a reason, sir. Are you going after her, or are you running from the Chos?" "Both, maybe. Neither." Kang Min picked up the ring, turned it once between his fingers. "I was going to disappear for a few weeks, let the Chos think I'd folded, sell them the building through the shell, buy us both room to breathe while I figured out how to dismantle whatever they're planning. If she didn't know where I was, she couldn't be used as leverage. And if she finds out you vanished the same night she walked out, she'll think I left the way she thinks I've been leaving for years." He set the ring down carefully. "Find out where she went, not to bring her back, just so I know she's safe, and find out everything the Chos have on that property. If they think I'll trade her dream for my silence, They don't understand what they're threatening. 3 miles away, Pamela sat in the back of a cab with her overnight bag on her lap, giving the driver an address she hadn't used in years. Her old friend Denise's place above a dry cleaner in Bushwick, the kind of small, ordinary apartment that used to embarrass her when she still measured her life against galas and marble counters. Tonight, it just felt like the only place untouched by anything Kang Min built. Denise opened the door in pajama pants, took one look at her face, and didn't ask a single question until there was tea in both their hands. You can stay as long as you need, you know that. I know. You could also let him send money, nobody would blame you. Pamela wrapped both hands around the mug. I'm not doing this to be stubborn. Then what for? Because every time I took something from him, I ended up owing him something back, even when he never said it out loud. She stared into the tea like it might tell her something new. I don't want to owe anyone anything anymore. I want to build something mine and know it's mine because I built it. Denise didn't fully understand yet, but she recognized the tone. It was the one Pamela used to have back in Fairfield before the marriage, before the galas and the empty dinners, and years of making herself small to fit someone else's silence. Denise had missed that voice more than she had admitted out loud. 2 days later, walking a neighborhood she hadn't visited in years just to clear her head, Pamela found herself in front of a shuttered storefront 3 blocks from Denise's apartment. The windows were boarded. The old awning, faded almost to nothing, still read bakery in peeling gold script. It wasn't Meridian Street. It wasn't the dream she'd buried 5 years ago. But something about the brick, the dust, the broken glass catching afternoon light on the floor inside, it felt like a door she hadn't known was still open. She stood there a long time before she let herself go in. The realtor's sign in the shuttered bakery's window was so old the phone number had changed area codes twice. Pamela called anyway, half expecting nothing, and reached a property management company that sounded surprised anyone still had the listing memorized. It's been empty 11 years, the man on the phone told her. Owner passed, family never settled the estate. We'd honestly love to see someone take it off the books. The price, when he named it, was almost insultingly low. Low enough that some old, cautious part of her searched for the catch before she let herself feel anything close to hope. There wasn't one, not really, beyond the obvious. It needed everything. New wiring, new floors, a walk-in that hadn't run in over a decade, a roof that had clearly been arguing with the weather and losing. She signed the lease to own paperwork 3 days later with money from an account Kang Min had never touched. The small, stubborn savings she'd built from selling recipe consulting work on the side, work she'd kept doing quietly for years without telling him, half because she didn't think he'd notice, and half because some part of her had wanted one thing that was entirely, provably hers. The work was slow, and it was hers, and for the first time and longer than she wanted to admit, that combination felt like enough. She learned to argue with contractors about tile grout. She learned the names of the kids who wandered in off the block just to see what the noise was, drawn by the smell of drywall dust and the sound of someone finally doing something with a building that had sat quiet for over a decade. One boy, maybe 9, watched her patch a hole in the ceiling and asked if she used to be rich. I used to be a lot of things, she told him, and he laughed like it was the funniest answer he'd ever heard, and something in her chest loosened for the first time in months. What she didn't know was that she wasn't rebuilding the bakery alone. 2 blocks away, in an unmarked sedan, a man named Jung watched her unlock the front doors every morning at 7. He reported to Han. Han reported to Kang Min. 3 times in the first 2 weeks, Jung quietly intervened before trouble found her, once turning away a man who asked too many specific questions about her schedule, once redirecting a delivery that wasn't a delivery at all. Pamela never saw any of it. She noticed sometimes a strange sense of being watched and told herself it was just the neighborhood, just old instincts from a life she was trying to leave behind. She was wrong, and the not knowing would cost her later. Kang Min, meanwhile, was losing a different kind of battle. Chairman O summoned him to the private room atop the Chungjia Tower on a Thursday, where the old man conducted business the way his father had, slow, deliberate, patience itself weaponized. "You've been distracted," O said, not a question. "I'm handling it." "You're handling a woman who left you while the Chos test how far your loyalty to this family actually extends." O's voice never needed to rise. "Sell them the building, publicly. Let them see you cut the weakness loose. It ends the questions, and it ends the talk that marriage has made you soft." No, O's expression didn't change, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "You'd choose one woman's bakery over everything your father built?" "I'd choose not lying to her again," Kangmin said, and heard himself say it, and understood he meant it in a way he hadn't 3 weeks ago. "I spent 5 years telling myself silence was protection. It wasn't. It was cowardice with better manners." O dismissed him without another word, and Kang Min walked out of that tower suspecting it was the last time as a man O would still call an ally. That night, in his office, with Pamela's abandoned ring still sitting on his desk where he'd left it, Kang Min made a decision of his own. He picked up his phone and typed a message he'd rewritten 4 times, then finally sent it before he could talk himself out of it again. "I know about the bakery. I'm not going to interfere. I only want you safe. If you ever want the truth about Meridian Street, I'll tell you all of it whenever you're ready to hear it. No conditions." He stared at the screen for 11 minutes. No reply came. He hadn't expected one. He set the phone down, picked up the ring instead, and turned it over once in his palm before locking it in the dresser drawer, like something he wasn't ready to bury and wasn't allowed to wear either. 3 miles away, Pamela read the message twice, then a third time, standing in the middle of her half-finished bakery with flour still on her hands. She didn't reply that night, but she didn't delete it either. She read it a 4th time before she finally set the phone face down and went back to sanding the counter she'd be serving customers from, someday, if everything went right. Some part of her, the part she'd buried longest, wondered all of it meant. She didn't reply to the text for 6 days. Then, on a Tuesday morning, with the bakery finally smelling like fresh paint instead of dust, she typed one line before she could talk herself out of it. "Tell me about Meridian Street. In person, neutral brown." They met at a diner 2 blocks from Denise's apartment, not the house, not his office, a place with sticky menus and a waitress who called everyone honey, chosen precisely because it belonged to neither of their old lives. Kang Min was already there when she arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 coffees ordered, hers with the cream she used to take before either of them could afford better and had simply never stopped taking. She noticed that. She hated that she noticed that. "Tell me," she said, sliding into the seat across from him, no preamble. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn before he started, the way she remembered him doing before difficult negotiations, like it steadied something in his hands. "5 years ago, my brother owed money to the Cho family, a gambling debt he'd let spiral into something that put the whole organization at risk. I paid it off by handing over 3 of our routes and agreeing to a peace that meant staying small in that territory indefinitely." His jaw tightened. "Meridian Street sits 2 blocks from their warehouse. I told you it could be yours before I fully understood what agreeing to that peace would mean long term. By the time I did understand, I couldn't take it back without looking weak enough to invite another attack." "So you let me believe you just stopped caring for 5 years. "I let you believe the easier lie because the true one meant admitting my brother's mistake nearly cost us everything, and that keeping you safe required keeping you in a marriage next door to men who'd use you against me in a heartbeat if they ever thought I loved you enough to be leveraged." Pamela's chest went tight. "That's not something to bury men. That's something you should have trusted me with." If I told you and you'd stayed anyway and something happened to you, do you understand what the silence cost me instead? Her voice cracked, the first real crack since she'd walked out. I spent years thinking I wasn't enough to be trusted with your world. I built an entire version of our marriage out of your quiet, and it was wrong, and you let it be wrong because you'd rather I resent you a little than fear for my life a lot. He had no answer for that. For once, the man who negotiated peace between armed men had nothing. The Cho family knows about the bakery. They've been watching since the day you signed the lease. I found out 3 days ago. Pamela went very still. How? Because they test weakness before they exploit it. They wanted to see if I'd sacrifice the building to protect you, or protect myself by staying silent about the danger. I chose silence again. He looked at her directly, no negotiating tone left in his voice at all. I'm done choosing that. I should have told you the moment you signed that lease. What do they want? Control of the routes I still have left. Or, failing that, they want me distracted enough that the northern family starts circling too. Either way, they've decided you're the fastest way to get it. He reached into his jacket, set a folded page on the table between them. Routes, names, dates, everything he'd kept quiet for 5 years, laid out plainly. I want to give the authorities everything, all of it. It ends the leverage entirely if there's nothing left to hold hostage. I wanted you to hear it from me before I do it, because it will end everything I've built, and I didn't want you to find out from the news. She stared at the page, then at him. You'd give up everything for a woman who told you understanding isn't the same as trusting you again? I'm not doing it to earn trust back. I'm doing it because you deserve to build something without a warehouse full of men deciding whether it survives. That's true whether or not you ever let me back into your life. She didn't answer right away. She turned the folded page over once in her hands, feeling the weight of 5 years of silence pressed into a single sheet. I understand why you did it. I do. But understanding isn't forgiveness, men. Not yet. I know. Don't do this for me. Do it because it's the truth. It's both. It's always going to be both with you. She left before either of them could find more words for that, but she took the folded page with her, and that night, alone in the half-finished bakery, she read it 3 times, understanding for the first time exactly how much danger had been quietly circling the dream she thought she'd finally reclaimed on her own. The call came 2 nights later, past midnight, while Pamela was still at the bakery finishing the last coat of paint on the front counter. You have something I want, the voice said, calm, almost friendly, which made it worse. And I have people watching someone you can't afford to lose twice. She didn't answer at first. Her hand tightened around the phone. Your husband's about to hand everything over to the authorities. Routes, names, all of it. Tell him to stop, or the bakery burns tonight, and you're inside it when it does. The line went dead before she could respond, which told her everything about how sure the caller was of his position. She called Kang Min with hands that wouldn't fully stop shaking. He picked up before the second ring. They called me, she said. They know about the authorities. They said the bakery burns tonight if you don't stop. Where are you right now? The bakery. I was finishing the counter. Leave now. Don't wait for anyone. Don't grab anything. Just leave through the back and go to Denise's. I'm sending... Men, there are kids here. 2 of the neighborhood boys, the ones who'd been coming by after school to help sand trim boards in exchange for lessons on frosting technique, were still in the back, finishing a mural they'd started on the alley-facing wall, the paint barely dry. I'm not leaving them, Pamela. I'm not leaving them. She was already moving toward the back room. Get here, fast. Jung, the man who'd been watching over her for weeks without her ever learning his name, met her at the alley door moments later. Having clearly been given the same panicked instruction, Kang Min was still shouting into the phone. He'd been sent to protect 1 woman. He found himself protecting 3. They got the boys out through the loading door just as two cars pulled up out front, men stepping out with the unhurried confidence of people who didn't expect resistance. Pamela's pulse hammered, but her hand stayed steady on the fire door, holding it open for the second boy through. By the time Kang Min and Han arrived, the standoff had already tightened into something close to a siege. Han's men held the alley, the Cho's men held the street. Kang Min stood in the middle of it, and for the first time in his life, understood the fight in front of him wasn't the fight that would actually save anyone. If I go in now, she might get caught in the middle of it. If I negotiate, they'll never let this go, not while I still have anything worth threatening. Then take away what they want, Han said. Burn it down yourself, all of it, the routes, the accounts, everything that makes you worth threatening. Hand it to the Financial Crimes Division before the Chos can use it as leverage first. There's nothing left to hold hostage if there's nothing left to take. It was the kind of decision that ended empires. Kang Min had spent his whole adult life building something out of fear and control, and Han was asking him to burn it to the ground in a single night for a woman who had already told him understanding wasn't the same as trust. He did it anyway. He made the call he'd kept in reserve for exactly this, a contact inside the Financial Crimes Division cultivated for years as insurance he'd hoped never to need. He gave them everything, 5 years of records, every route, every account, every name, including his own. Within the hour, sirens replaced silence. The Cho's men scattered the moment they understood what was coming because loyalty built on fear evaporates the instant fear starts pointing somewhere else. The standoff broke apart before a single shot answered another. Pamela found him standing outside the bakery as police lights swept red and blue across the wet pavement, his knuckles split from a fight he'd barely needed to finish, his empire dismantling itself in real time over radios all around him. She walked toward him without deciding to. "You gave it all up," she said. "There wasn't anything in it worth keeping if it meant losing you twice." His voice, always so certain in every other room, came out unsteady in this one. "I'm not asking you to fix this by coming back to me. I gave it up because it was rotten and because you deserved a lot better than a man who needed the empire more than he needed you. I don't think I've earned the right to ask you for anything else." Pamela didn't answer right away. She stood there under the flashing lights, watching the only life he'd ever known collapse quietly behind him, and said nothing at all. Pamela said nothing that night, and Kang Min didn't ask her to. He let go of her hand first, gently, like he understood that holding on any longer would turn a moment of grace into a demand. The weeks after moved slower than either of them expected. Kang Min sold what remained legally his to sell, the routes, the contracts, the properties built on money he no longer wanted traced back through anyone. He kept almost nothing for himself. Most of it went into a fund the authorities allowed him to direct toward the neighborhoods his old operations had quietly drained for years, the block around the bakery among them. He testified when they asked him to. He didn't request protection in return. The trial was ugly. Chairman O's remaining loyalists made sure of that, but Kang Min sat through every session without flinching because for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to defend except the truth. He didn't call Pamela. He didn't send flowers or lawyers or apologies dressed up as gifts. He simply did the work, month after month, and let her decide on her own time whether any of it meant anything. Denise noticed before Pamela said a word about it. "He's still showing up," Denise said one evening, nodding at an article on Pamela's laptop screen. Another quiet piece about the Neighborhood Redevelopment Fund. His name mentioned once, buried near the bottom. Most men make one grand gesture and disappear. He's just doing it over and over, not asking anyone to notice. "I know," Pamela said. "So what are you waiting for?" Pamela closed the laptop. "I'm not waiting for him to prove he loves me. I already know he does. I'm waiting to find out if I can trust that love without losing myself inside it again. Denise sat beside her, quiet for a moment. Then don't choose out of fear, and don't choose out of obligation either, just because he finally did the right thing. Choose because of what you actually want, once you're not scared anymore. It was the kind of sentence Pamela carried with her for weeks, turning it over every time she stood behind the counter of the bakery, which was at last almost finished. Jung still watched the block sometimes, out of habit more than instruction now that the danger had passed, and reported back to Han that Pamela had started clothing up alone at night, unafraid, humming under her breath while she wiped down the ovens. Han mentioned it to Kong Min exactly once, and Kong Min said nothing back, just nodded, like the smallest possible piece of good news was still more than he'd let himself expect. One evening in early spring, 5 months after the night the standoff broke apart on Meridian's back alley, Pamela stood in the bakery after closing, mixing the last test batch of a laminated dough recipe she'd been chasing since culinary school and never quite perfected. Tonight, for the first time, it folded exactly right. She stood there a long moment, flour on her hands, looking at proof that the thing she'd buried for 5 years hadn't died in the ground. It had just been waiting for the right kind of quiet to come back. She thought about the folded page of routes and names Kong Min had handed her at the diner, the one she still kept in a drawer at Denise's, evidence of a truth he'd finally chosen over silence, even when silence would have been so much easier. She thought about the text message she'd never fully answered, still sitting unread but not deleted in a phone. She thought about a man standing outside a burning down empire, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, simply choosing over and over to show up anyway. She wasn't scared anymore. She recognized the feeling only because its absence had been so loud for so long. She picked up her phone and typed a single line before she could talk herself out of it. "Come see the bakery. It's ready." His reply came back in under a minute, the fastest he'd answered anything in 5 months. He arrived in 18 minutes, not 20, still in his work clothes, tie loosened like he'd left wherever he was the second her text came through. The bakery glowed warm against the dark street. New paint, new windows, the mural the 2 boys had finished, now covering the entire alley-facing wall in bright, unafraid color. Inside, the display case sat empty, waiting for a morning that hadn't happened yet, but the smell of butter and yeast filled the whole room, proof of a life that had already begun whether or not anyone official had opened the doors. Kang Min stopped just inside the entrance, taking it in the way a man takes in something he isn't sure he's allowed to be proud of. "You did all this," he said quietly. "We did this," Pamela said, "even if you never let anyone see your name on it." He didn't answer that. He'd stopped needing credit for anything months ago, and it showed in the way he stood now, lighter somehow, like a man who'd finally set down something heavy he'd carried his whole adult life. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the counter, where a small paper bag sat waiting. She'd thought about this moment more times than she wanted to admit, rehearsed it in the quiet after closing, doubted it twice, nearly talked herself out of it a third time. But watching him stand there now, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, she understood Denise had been right. This wasn't fear. It wasn't obligation. It was simply what she wanted now that she wasn't scared anymore. She opened the bag and pulled out the laminated pastry she'd finally perfected, the one she'd chased since culinary school, the one that had folded right for the first time only 5 nights ago. "I named it," she said, setting it on a small plate between them. "It doesn't have a fancy name. I just call it the honest one, because it's the first thing I've made in 5 years that isn't hiding anything. Not a shortcut, not a compromise, just the recipe done exactly the way it's supposed to be done. Start to finish, no shortcuts I told myself were good enough." He looked at the pastry, then at her, understanding it wasn't really about the pastry at all. "I'm not handing you the old life back," she said. "The house, the ring, the version of us that ran on things left unsaid. That's not what this is. I don't want that back. I don't think I ever really want it back, even in the version where nothing went wrong. I don't want it back either, he said. I spent 5 years building an empire out of the belief that love makes men weak, that keeping you safe meant keeping you in the dark. It didn't make me weak. Hiding it did. I understood it too late, but I understood it. I know. She looked down at the pastry between them, still warm. I forgive you, men. Not because you burned everything down for me. That was never what I needed you to prove. I forgive you because you kept showing up, quietly, for 5 months, without once asking me to notice. And somewhere in there, I realized a man who does that isn't the man who used to leave the room every time things got hard. His hand found the edge of the counter, steadying himself against something that had nothing to do with the counter at all. I sold the house. The real one, not the one in the divorce filing, the one we lived in, all of it. I didn't want to keep living inside a version of us that had already ended. I bought a place 2 blocks from here instead. Small, nothing like what you're picturing. I wasn't going to tell you unless tonight went well. You were that sure I'd say no? I wasn't sure of anything, he said. I stopped being sure of things the night you took the ring off. I decided I'd rather build something worth being uncertain about than go back to being certain of something rotten. She laughed, a real laugh, the first one he'd heard from her in almost half a year, and it landed in his chest like something physical. Can we start over? He asked, quiet, the question he'd clearly been carrying since he walked in. She looked at him for a long moment, the smell of butter and yeast filling the small room around them, street light coming soft through the new front windows onto the counter where a marriage had once quietly ended and now was carefully becoming something else entirely. No, she said. His face fell, just slightly, before she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out something small. Not the old ring, that one still sat in a drawer somewhere at Denise's, a piece of a life built on silence and quiet sacrifice. 2 people who had loved each other without ever really seeing each other clearly. This was different. Small, plain, a single brass key on a worn ribbon, the kind of thing you'd give someone who was about to be trusted with something real. She placed it in his open hand. This is the second set to the bakery, she said. I'm not asking you to start over with me, because starting over means pretending the 5 years before this didn't happen, and I don't want to pretend anymore. I want to start honestly instead. That means you get a key, not because it fixes anything, but because I want you here, for the mornings, the bad batches, the ovens breaking at the worst possible time, all of it, the parts that aren't easy. His hand closed around the key, and for the first time, not during the standoff, not during the trial, not during any moment the rest of the world had watched him stay perfectly composed, his fingers trembled just slightly around something so small. Honestly, he repeated, like he was testing the shape of the word in his mouth for the first time. Honestly, she said, every version of us after tonight only works if it's built on that, nothing else. Outside, the street was quiet, the kind of late spring quiet that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. Inside, the bakery smelled like butter and second chances, and for the first time in 5 years, neither of them was protecting anything from the other at all. She picked up the pastry, broke it in half, and handed him the larger piece. Try it, she said. Tell me if it's finally worth the wait. He did, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, because some things don't need translating. The taste of something built patiently, honestly, exactly the way it was always supposed to be, needing no one's permission to finally exist. The bakery opened to the public on a bright Saturday in early summer, 6 weeks after that night with the key and the honest pastry. New paint on the sign now, the boarded windows long gone, the mural on the alley wall bright enough to catch the eye of anyone walking by. Pamela stood behind the counter greeting the first customers of the morning line, neighbors, the 2 boys who'd helped with the mural now proudly telling everyone it was theirs, Denise up front with a bouquet she pretended not to be emotional about. It took Pamela a moment to notice Kang Min near the back, half hidden by the crowd, watching a room full of people taste something she'd built with her own hands, looking like a man who still couldn't quite believe he was allowed to be part of it. He didn't try to take credit for any of it. He never did anymore. He carried trays, wiped down tables, let a 6-year-old boss him around about frosting technique, and answered to nothing but the guy who does dishes now when customers asked who he was. Later that evening, after the doors closed and the last chair was stacked, Pamela found him sitting on the back step with 2 cups of coffee, hers with the cream, the same as always. 5 months ago, I didn't think I'd be standing in a bakery that actually opened, she said, sitting beside him. 5 months ago, I didn't think I'd still be here to see it. Turns out showing up quietly for a long time is a lot harder than burning an empire down in one night. The empire only took an hour. She laughed, leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a while, neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. The quiet between them finally meant something different than it used to. Not a wall, just rest. If Pamela and Min's story stayed with you, I've got more where that came from. Grieving Mafia heirs, HR professionals who refuse to be intimidated, corporate rivals who fall for each other one bad decision at a time. Come find the rest of my stories and let's keep the ride going. See you in the next one.